Assalamu alaikum, good evening and welcome. As you know, it's just after 8:30 here in the United Kingdom and we are coming to you live from the studios of British Muslim TV here in sunny Wakefield with this week's edition of Questions with me, your host, Mohammed Shafiq. Now, we're broadcasting Sky Channel 752 and across social media at British Muslim TV. Wherever you are joining us from around the world, a very warm welcome. Now, we want you to comment on the big stories we're covering tonight. Call us now on 01924 231 083 or messages on the WhatsApp number, which is on the screen now. And if you're watching this on Facebook across the world, post your comments in the chat box. We'll read some of them on air later. Now, tonight, first, we head to Atlanta in Georgia in the United States to talk to the National Deputy Director for CARE Council on American Islamic relations about the important work they're doing in empowering American Muslims and taking a stance against Islamophobia and racism. We then head to Chicago in Illinois, talk to community activist Gerald Hankerson about what life is like in Chicago for American Muslims. What are the challenges? How is the diversity there? And what differences are Muslims making to the city and wider state? We want to hear from you tonight. You can gather we're focusing on the United States tonight. You can call us on 01924 231 083 or messages on British Muslim TV across social media. Alternatively, you can send us a WhatsApp message. The number is on your screen. The questions we're considering tonight: how important is it for American Muslims to be engaged in civic activity? How can Islamophobia be exposed and eradicated? And how have Muslims contributed to your local community? Please share your thoughts now on 01924 231 083. Messages on WhatsApp, post on social media. And as I said, we'll read some of the comments throughout the programme. Right, let's get started on the programme and our first guest. Now, ever since 9/11, American Muslims have been at the forefront of an ever-increasing hostile environment where Muslims are discriminated against, fake news perpetuated about them, something like Muslims are seen as alien to wider society and not worthy of equality. But in recent years, American Muslims have taken a more visible role in public life, engaging in communities, making a difference in various industries and professions. Ahmed Mitchell is the National Deputy Director for CARE, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations. He's one of America's most prominent Muslim voices, and in recent days has advocated Muslims to protect themselves and their communities from the threat of the far right. He's a former journalist and attorney, and is often the very first Muslim the media call upon to react to events and stories on the mainstream media across the United States. I'm pleased to say Ahmed Mitchell is joining us live from the city of Atlanta in Georgia in the United States. Brother, very warm welcome to the programme. Such an honour for us to have this conversation here on British Muslim TV.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Firstly, how do you assess life for American Muslims in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 and during those years of the war on terror?
Sure, bismillah. So I think many people have a misconception. They think that right after 9/11, that was the worst time for Islamophobia in the United States. But strangely, it wasn't. Right after 9/11, there actually was much difficulty. Obviously, there were hate crimes, there was hate speech against Muslims and Arab Americans and government overreach. But most Americans still maintained a positive image of their Muslim neighbors, according to public polling. The federal government was actually at least friendly in its language towards American Muslims. President Bush even visited a mosque in D.C. to insist that Islam should not be blamed for 9/11. And so in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, things were not as bad as they would become later. It was only about 10 years later, after anti-Muslim hate groups had had time to organize, after we had seen tensions rise as a result of 8 years of bad government policy targeting Muslims, the Iraq War, and then the rise of groups like the Tea Party, that we really saw anti-Muslim bigotry surge in this country. So you really jump from 9/11 to the year 2010, when the far-right Tea Party won election to the Congress, when President Obama was the target of these ridiculous anti-Muslim conspiracy theories, that you suddenly see a spark, a huge spike in anti-Muslim sentiment in the broader public and anti-Muslim hate crimes. And then obviously that continued on through 2014, 2015. And then with President Trump's arrival on the scene, it ballooned. And now in modern times, I would say things have actually gotten better. But that's a bit of a history from 9/11 to the present day in very short form.
Yeah. We know that in the last 48 hours, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is the head of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda was killed in a drone strike in the Afghan capital of Kabul. How do you assess 21 years later that justice has finally been done and caught up with Ayman al-Zawahiri?
You know, it is difficult to overstate the effect that the 9/11 attacks had on not just American Muslims, obviously, but the United States and the trajectory of world history. If you think of all the things that occurred around the world as a result of that attack, Afghanistan, the Iraq War, Guantanamo Bay, eventually the ISIS, I mean, all sorts of things have happened as a result of that one attack. Millions of people have been killed, and most of them Muslims, innocent Muslims in the Middle East. And so when you really think about the horror that that attack unleashed on not only one country, but people around the world, it's difficult to overstate it. We know that Allah is the ultimate deliverer of justice to all of us. And we obviously pray that we are on the right side, on the just side in this life, in the next, and that people are no longer victimized by violence, whether it's violence of terrorism, by terrorist groups, or by governments that are engaging in horrific human rights abuses around the world. So we hope that things will get better, that as whether it's dictators or terrorists leave the scene, that things will be better. But sadly, there are always, you could say, bad actors to take the place of bad people who leave the scene.
Yeah. And talking about that Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred, how does that manifest itself in American society?
So look, I think, if you look at CARE and our civil rights organization, we address many different things: school bullying, employment discrimination, abuses at the immigration level when Muslims are traveling or immigrating to or from the United States. I would say that the most significant thing that we deal with, the thing that scares us the most, hate crimes, obviously, because of the violence involved in hate crimes. However, that is not the most common problem that Muslims in America face. The most common problem that Muslims in America face is actually employment discrimination. That is the most common form of bigotry that we deal with, is a Muslim in the workplace being fired or mistreated or denied a reasonable religious accommodation in the workplace. Now, I'm happy to say that over the past 30 years of CARE's work, we've made a lot of progress because the law is really on the side of American Muslims. It is no longer disputed that Muslim women have the right to wear hijab, that Muslim men have the right to grow beards, that Muslims have the right to take off for a prayer break and to go to Jummah. These are all settled issues in the law in most areas of work. Now it's just a matter of making sure the law is being enforced when it's violated. So that is still the most common thing that we deal with. But the scariest thing that we worry about, of course, are hate crimes. We have not had a mass shooting at a mosque in America, alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah. We've seen that in Canada, New Zealand, other places. It has not happened here, and we pray it never happens. But we have seen other acts of violence at our masajid and directed at Muslims just walking around in their daily lives. So those are things that we worry the most about. And alhamdulillah, it doesn't happen as often as the other issues that we deal with.
Yeah. And who do you put that responsibility down in terms of Islamophobia? Because often the accusation is made towards the media, to politicians, the rhetoric that we see in mainstream society. How do you think that is developed?
There's a lot of blame to go around, Mohammed. So obviously the media for years was the leading purveyor of anti-Muslim bigotry and misinformation about Islam, especially in the years after 9/11. But even before that, dating back to the 1980s, if you watch, Hollywood movies that involve Muslims or the Middle East back in the 80s, 90s, there was all sorts of misinformation out there that was spreading negative views about Muslims. So, of course, the media, both journalism and Hollywood, had a big role in that. The government, obviously, especially under President Trump and other administrations, by the way, had a role in contributing to anti-Muslim bigotry. And then, of course, you got hate groups that are very active online, where there are no limits and they're able to spread misinformation to unsuspecting people on the internet. But then, of course, I think we as Muslims also have to take responsibility. We are the ones who have to deliver our own message and tell our own story and control our own narrative. And so I think, as you noted earlier, alhamdulillah, Muslims have made a very concerted effort for decades, but especially in recent years, to tell our own story in various platforms, whether that's the media, through politics, journalism, through our interactions with our neighbors at the local level. This has been going on for years, especially with the African-American Muslim community, which has been around for a long time. But especially in recent years, we've seen a great uptick in that sort of Muslim engagement. And so I think that is turning the tide slowly but surely in terms of American views of American Muslims.
Yeah, we're coming, I think, close to a break very, very shortly. But So let's just explore that. I mean, how do you assess life for American Muslims now compared to what it was like, say, 21 years ago in the immediate aftermath?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things you look at. So number one, you can look at public polling to get an understanding of what the American people think about Muslims, right? That's one of the things that we are concerned about. What do our neighbors think of us? Do they have a good understanding of Islam? Do they have a positive feeling about their Muslim neighbors? We have seen the numbers on that have gotten worse after 9/11. So after 9/11, there was a negative spike, but still mostly positive. And then by the time you jump ahead to 2010, the numbers are upside down, 60% negative, 30% positive. In recent years, after President Trump's departure, we've seen the polling on that get a little bit better. We also polled the American Muslim people to get their views about what they think life is like as American Muslims. And our most recent poll showed very positive numbers that most Muslims feel like they are an integral and accepted part of America, that they feel like their rights are generally protected, that they can practice Islam in America. So those are key things we look at. And then, of course, we want to make sure and see that our numbers of complaints are going down. That is not happening. Our complaints are still going up. Even after Donald Trump left, Islamophobia didn't start with him, didn't end with him. So those numbers are still going up. But overall, in terms of public perceptions of Muslims and Muslim perceptions of their role in America, things are looking up.
Going to take a break. Edward, I know you're going to stay with us, inshallah. We've got a very short break, and then after the break, we'll talk a bit more about that story which is causing waves on social media, where you said American Muslims should arm themselves to protect themselves from gun violence. Obviously a big issue in the United States, if not around the world as well. We'll take some of your comments, we'll take some of your calls. The number, as you know, is 01924-231-083. The WhatsApp number is on the screen there as well. And if you're watching this on social media, please do post your comments and we'll get through some of them. My special guest is the National Deputy Director for CARE, USA, Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who's joining us live from Atlanta in Georgia. Right, we'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our important conversation with Brother Edward, and we'll take some of your calls as well. Join us on the other side of these very important messages. But as I promised, they'll be very short, and we'll be back before you know it. I might have a chance to get a sip of a water, but don't go anywhere. Join us on the other side of this. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. I'm joined by somebody very special, Brother Ahmed, Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Looking up as in terms of, I mentioned it in the opening, lots of different industries, Muslims playing a positive role, particularly seen during this pandemic, where people on the front line of the health sector would make a big difference as well. The doctors, the nurses, people who put their lives at risk.
Absolutely. We have a uniquely large number of doctors in America who are Muslim. And so even people who hate Muslims, they probably cross paths with a Muslim doctor treating them. We saw that in the pandemic. Absolutely. In fact, there were Muslims who died treating patients, including a prominent Muslim doctor in Virginia who came out of retirement to treat COVID patients, caught the virus, and died. May Allah grant him the highest rank of paradise. So yeah, I think that also helped people getting to see their Muslim neighbors at the forefront of helping them. And not only Muslim doctors, also Masajid that were providing food and other resources to people at the beginning of the pandemic when the economy collapsed. So yes, I think that's been true in America, and I assume in Western countries around the world with large Muslim populations.
And I mean, you talked about, we're going to talk just after the break a bit more about the campaigns that you're working on. But I was interested in the outreach work that you do in schools. Tell us a bit about that. What's the objective and what's the response been from the schools to that work?
So it's very important that American Muslim students can go to school and learn and practice their faith when necessary in peace and security. And so the other important part about the school system is that we want to make sure kids are getting a proper education. For many years there was a lot of misinformation in textbooks about Muslims or Islam, or no information at all. And so we've seen American Muslim groups across the country, including CARE, make a very concerted effort to ensure that schools are teaching neutral and accurate information about Muslims and Islamic history, especially in America, and also that Muslim students are able to go to school in peace. That part is not necessarily where we want it to be. Way too many students are being bullied and mistreated at school, but that I think is getting better and has gotten better. And so that is just an ongoing struggle that I don't think is going to end anytime soon, to make sure that our educational system is welcoming the students of all faiths and backgrounds.
Yeah, and you look at some of the commentary for like Fox News or the other right-wing newspapers who kind of target halal meat practicing of wearing the hijab. Is that something that you come across?
Well, you all in Britain are much more advanced than us. We're not to the point of having halal meat in most schools yet, or even having Islamic holidays recognized in most schools. So we are still behind you, but I'm sure once we get that stuff recognized and added, there'll be some blowback to it, inshallah. But that's still something that we're fighting for. Now, in major cities, New York and other cities, you do see some Muslim holidays, Eid, recognized on calendars. You do see halal food as an option in some cities, but those cities are very large, very diverse, and so there really has been blowback to it in that cities. I think when you see that start happening in other cities and more rural areas, that's where I think you might see people lighting their hair on fire a little bit. But the one nice thing about America is there is a great tradition in modern times of religious freedom, of respect for freedom of religion, and so I think that is something that's going to be of great help to us as American Muslims continue to make progress in our country.
Yeah, because you mentioned that I've got children in school. It's kind of a given that halal meat is provided. It's a given. For example, Eid al-Adha happened to be on a Sunday for us. Pupils were given the Monday off. Wow.
Yeah, that is not a given for us at all. Not in most cities.
Yeah.
Anyway, again, only in a few major cities. But no, American Muslims make up about 0.9% of the U.S. population right now. And so we're still, in most places, too small of numbers to make that big of a change. But in major cities, Chicago, New York, LA, DC, Dallas, other cities, I think you will see those accommodations occurring in the years to come, inshallah.
I've not been to the States for a while, and I'm just sensing that you look at Talib Rashid, who got elected yesterday in the primary. You see the Progressive Squad. You will see Muslims now taking a more prominent role in American public life. That's a good thing, isn't it?
It is. I think absolutely to see more Muslims involved in a very public way in the media, in politics, even in film. I think it's very important, not only for our communities, youth, to see themselves represented and reflected when they turn on their TVs, when they are engaged in public work, but also to make sure that the Muslim community's voice is represented in important discussions, whether that's in government, in the halls of Congress, in the newsroom. I think that it's very important that the Muslim voice is there, that we're not just talked about, but we are doing the talking. At the same time, however, I would say that I do not believe in representation for the sake of representation. I could care less if a Muslim ever gets elected to office in this country. What I care about is principled Muslims getting elected, and principled Muslims engaged in the media, and principled Muslims doing movies and TV shows, because we don't want to have representation that doesn't really reflect our community, that is token, or that represents the worst aspects of our community. So yes, representation is important to us, and we're happy to see it. We just want to make sure we're always seeing principled representation of the Muslim community in the media, in politics, in Hollywood, and elsewhere.
Now, a few weeks ago, you said American Muslims should arm themselves to protect themselves from potential far-right gun crime and Islamophobia. Tell us a bit about your reasoning behind that. I mean, you're talking to an international British audience who are not very used to sort of the American obsession with guns.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think, me and many other Americans are very concerned about the gun violence we've seen in this country, which does not happen anywhere else around the world. We've seen mass shooting after mass shooting, many of them targeting schools, but some of them racist attacks targeting houses of worship, synagogues, masajid, Sikh temples, even Black churches. And this has happened over and over and over again. And usually the shooter carries an AR-15 assault rifle, wears bulletproof vests, films himself, and goes in and unleashes violence on unsuspecting, unarmed people who literally can do nothing except run for their lives, wait to be shot, or call 911 and hope that the shooter does not find them. I think we as American Muslims have to make sure that we are not just walking around hoping that nothing bad ever happens. Our community has not been targeted by a mass shooter who has unleashed horrific violence like we saw in New Zealand or Canada. That has not happened at a mosque in America yet. and we don't want it to happen. Masajid, I believe, are very vulnerable places because we're very welcoming. We welcome people off the street to come in and learn about Islam. We pray facing one direction. There are no chairs, no pews for the most part. So if someone walks into a mosque while people are praying, they're in a very, very vulnerable position. And so what I wrote in my article is that, number one, institutions, Muslim and otherwise, have to take their security seriously. That means security cameras. That means locked doors. That means perhaps bulletproof windows. But it also means armed self-defense. If someone walks into a mosque or a synagogue or a black church with an AR-15, you're not going to talk them down. You're not going to quiet them down using harsh language, right? You are going to have to defend yourselves. And the problem is with these weapons of war, a shooter with a weapon of war can unleash horrific violence in a very short amount of time. In fact, it was a law enforcement officer who told me, look, even if we get to your mosque in 30 seconds, which usually is not how quick they get there, who knows how many people could be killed in that short amount of time. So for all those reasons, we believe it is very important that American Muslim institutions practice all the aspects of self-defense. That includes using armed security or armed police officers or authorizing members of the community who are trained, trusted to carry weapons so that they can respond if a shooter occurs. And again, that is advice that I have seen law enforcement give because they know how dangerous this threat is. So no, do we want people, wantonly arming themselves and turning the country into the wild, wild west, even more so than it already is? No. But we do believe that American Muslims cannot be left vulnerable to an attacker, that these mass shooters cannot believe that walking into a mosque is going to be like a hunter going out looking for defenseless rabbits. It's just not acceptable to us. We've got to protect ourselves.
We know that black churches, white churches, but churches and synagogues have also been attacked, and we've seen mass shootings. What's the advice or the experience from the Jewish or the Christian community?
Yeah, well, look, the same thing. I mean, if you look at the shootings that have occurred, there was an attack in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue. A single shooter armed with weapons was able to go in and kill numerous people, and he was not stopped. In Colleyville, it was actually a mentally ill man from Britain who came to Texas and took hostages at a synagogue there. He had a gun, and he was not stopped. And then at a black church in Charleston, South Carolina, years ago, a young white man with just a pistol walked into a Bible study and was able to just kill a room full of people unencumbered. And so, if one of the people in that synagogue or that church had been armed, would that have stopped the shooter? I don't know. We don't know. But would it have been ideal for us to have that option, that self-defense option there? Absolutely. We, again, cannot leave ourselves, but whether it's a church, synagogue, a mosque, because guns are so readily available in America, because they're already out there, and because we have this serious problem with racism, we have to defend ourselves. And by the way, I think that is a perfectly Islamic thing to do. I think we as Muslims believe in self-defense. We believe in protecting ourselves and our families and our institutions. And so I think this is part and parcel of not only Islam, but also being an American, that you've got the right to defend yourselves, that right-wing extremists are not the only ones who've got the right to go to a gun store. We've got the same right too. And it's about time our institutions have to exercise it to protect ourselves from these mass shooters.
Now, we're coming up to the midterms, which are the elections to Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. How do you assess Joe Biden's administration so far? And what's your prediction in terms of the impact Muslims may make in those midterms?
Sure. Well, let me preface this by saying that CARE, as a nonprofit organization, we do not endorse candidates or comment on candidates who get involved in electoral politics, but we do comment on policy. So let me speak just to policy. I think that if you look at our recent poll of American Muslims, about half, 49% of American Muslims disapprove of President Biden's job performance, and only about 20-something% approve of his performance. And that matches up somewhat closely with the broader American public's views of his presidency. I think the reasons that American Muslims are disheartened with his job are maybe a little bit different than the broader public. So obviously the economy here has been very rough. Inflation's running wild. And so that's part of the reason why there is displeasure with his administration. But the unique things that Muslims are concerned about are, number one, international human rights. President Biden has maintained President Trump's policy of supporting dictators in the Muslim world, authoritarian dictators who are very oppressive. He has remained in lockstep support of the Israeli government's abuses of the Palestinian people. He has failed most recently to hold the Israeli government accountable for killing Al Jazeera journalist and American citizen Shireen Abu Akleh. And he has not held the UAE accountable for arresting an American lawyer who represented Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah.
And so,
sorry, I'm just going to say, what's the latest on that?
So we are still fighting for the release of that attorney. The administration is not doing much of anything to help. Shireen's case, as you all know, administration not doing much there either. So those are some of the reasons why the American Muslim community is very displeased with the president's job performance. But there is still time for him to get it right, to turn things around. We'll see if he does it.
Yeah, well, sadly, reached the end of our time together. I absolutely loved it, Brother Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish you best. Love to the family. And please do come and visit us if you come back to the UK sometime soon. Join us on the other side of these important messages. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. I told you it's going to be brief. Anyway, we are live here on British Muslim TV, Sky Channel 752. And today is episode 95 of my programme, Questions. Where's the time gone? We've had hundreds of guests during that time. We've had loads of experiences, and we've had an opportunity to showcase the talent, the lived experience and stories, not from just the British Muslim community, but also from across the world. So thank you so much for all of that. If you've got any ideas how we can celebrate our 100th anniversary, 100th episode, please do get in touch with us on British Muslim TV. Let us know your thoughts about the programme, if you enjoy it, you find it beneficial, and if you don't, maybe how we can make the programme better. And James, who's my producer, would say the programme is absolutely perfect. And I would happen to agree with him. I always agree with James because he's a very important person. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everybody. So anyway, we're going to open the lines as well. 01924 231083. Get in touch with us on social media. As you know, that the Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, was killed at the weekend in Kabul. So if you want to talk about that and talk about Islamophobia and what life is like for American Muslims, please do get in touch with us on British Muslim TV. Let's move on to our next guest. Now, the city of Chicago is known as one of the most diverse cities in the United States, as well as being a city of the former US President Barack Obama. It has a vibrant, diverse Muslim community. Historians say that the Muslim community began in 1920 and has links to Asia, the Middle East, Africa, South America, and Europe. What is that history? How does the diversity interact with each other? And who are some of the prominent faces in the city? Gerald Hankerson is a community activist based in the city of Chicago. He's currently outreach coordinator for CARE Chicago. He's a journalist and also a public speaker. He's often described as the voice and face of Chicago's Muslim community. I'm pleased to say Gerald Hankerson is joining us live on British Muslim TV from the great city of Chicago in the United States. Firstly, Gerald, assalamu alaikum. Great to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good to see you again, bro.
Likewise, and thank you so much for giving so much time. I know you're giving us the whole hour. So, yeah, if you've got any questions for Gerald, please do get in touch with us now with 924 231083. How are you? How's the family? How's things in Chicago?
Alhamdulillah, things are really great with everyone. Chicago is a vibrant city in the summertime, as you probably know and heard. But everything is still just as crazy as with any other place dealing with the pandemic, other issues, inflation. So Chicago is not an anomaly in that sense, but there are still promising things for the citizens and residents. And so which is always going to be the city that works.
Yeah, a city that works. Tell us a bit about the Muslim community in Chicago. Now, I've been there years ago, 2003 or 4, I think it was, just after the Iraq War. Vibrant, diverse community. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more dynamic Muslim communities in the United States. And I just pretty much would cite it's really emblematic of what Chicago is. Chicago itself is a global city that's welcoming people from all over the world. And so that has been very magnetic for the Muslim community. But as you noted, the Muslim roots here are deep just as well. So over a century's worth of Muslims, in fact, even predating the actual establishment communities. You can go back to the 1893 World's Fair, where there were exhibits and displays of Muslim culture and actually practicing Muslims here as well. Not too far from where I live in what's now known as Hyde Park and in the greater Jackson Park area. So the Muslim community is well represented from every possible place imaginable where we know there are majority Muslim populations. And the dynamics here, I think, in terms of the spirit of the city being rather industrious, very visionary space to be, we've been able to thrive. And I think that's very much reflected in the network of organizations, of masajid. When you think about major events gathering to really gather more minds, whether it's thinking about our deen more deeply, or being more civically engaged and being more socially minded. So it's definitely where, not only for the residents here, but Muslims from across the United States and the world, as you just attested to your own visits, always find some powerful ways to be engaged and be more proud and more immersed of their Muslim experience, and therefore, in this case, the American experience.
Yeah, and that diversity is often in different parts of the world. You would think there would be clashes, but there isn't. It's quite cohesive. You've got obviously the African American community. Many of them are converts to Islam, but then people from India, Pakistan, the Arab world, Bosnia as well.
Yeah, literally, you could probably find every corner of the globe right here in the metro region. So definitely, there are many masajid that exist. Obviously, the way the communities have grown, where there are specific national origins or ethnic and racial backgrounds represented in those particular masajid. So whether it's Arabic, Bosnian, Nigerian, Turkish, so you definitely can find those particular spaces. But in my own experience, as someone who did embrace Islam many moons ago,
you still look young. Let me just say that to you, Gerald. You still look very young.
Jazakallah. I just actually celebrated my birthday last week, so
happy birthday. Yeah,
thank you, appreciate it. But in my own personal experiences, like every space, whether it's a masjid, whether it's community organizations, it's been welcoming. But I do believe we have had hard conversations here and across the United States of what it means for our genuine relationships to build, whether it's certain misunderstandings and mistrust, whether founded or unfounded, within our own ummah that's represented here. And so it definitely gives way where there's always room for us to improve and to really exhibit what the merits of our deen really speaks to in terms of being, colorless and not necessarily really building on other things like you got to have more wealth or more education. At the end of the day, it's about talk. And so I think all the communities here represent that. But there's always ways we can strive to be better, inshallah.
And obviously those different communities will bring their own culture and their customs. How is that interaction as a Chicagoan Muslim community?
It's an eclectic one because
so a mixed one, yeah?
Yeah, it mixes well, but still it has been able to maintain its own flavors, right? And so one thing I do explain to a lot of visitors to our city, especially speaking about the Muslim community, we're not immune to some of the unfortunate legacies that still endure, not only for this city, but again, across the country. And so Chicago is definitely synonymous with redlining, which was a practice to make sure that namely Blacks and some other peoples only live in certain particular districts of the city. So segregation is still very prominent here, although you do see some movements in terms of the changing demographics. We just had the 2020 census, so we know there's some population shifts, not only just in terms of growth, but also where people are moving and living. And so in that, what you're seeing is where you have longstanding communities, like you mentioned, the African-American community, But you also have some masajid that just recently celebrated their 50th anniversary, the Muslim Community Center. So you do have where you can definitely go to certain sections of the city and this is definitely where Devon Avenue, our South Asian Muslim community exists. Or if you go in certain parts of Uptown, you go see the wonderful mix of people from throughout like West Africa, Eastern Africa, some parts across the former Soviet states. But it is that mix that, where there's the respect, but there's also too, when it's time to come together, it happens. But I do believe, however, the challenges are for the newer communities that are coming in. So definitely, with all the strife that's impacted the communities like the Rohingya, the Uyghurs, definitely some of those particular communities, they're smaller, but they're coming through. And so there have been, the way I've been speaking about that network, organizations have been created, community centers, people who just want to help. And so even those who are newer to the city are able to find their footing where they still are respected for who they are, their culture, their history, their traditions, but also being welcomed into what is known as Chicago. And so I think it works well with us.
And when you look at those problems and you look at the issues, are you saying that the experience of African American community is somewhat different to the challenges of a Pakistani community in Chicago?
Definitely. I think one of the things that people should be mindful of is when we're thinking about how communities are arranged here in the United States, definitely you could chalk it up to your socioeconomic status, right? In terms of where you can buy, and therefore you can definitely, live in just about any place you want. However, not all those communities are guaranteed to be diverse in other ways. And so here in the United States, and especially Chicago, a lot of communities that we see, they're not necessarily technically so distinguished where you could say there's a quote unquote Muslim community per se. So like me, myself, like I live in a majority African-American community where there's obviously other faith backgrounds, Christian mostly, of course, but that could very well be said about many of fellow Black Muslims. Same with that district I just told you about, Devon Avenue, which is on the far north side of the city. This is a very rich, diverse street when you go the entire expanse going from east to west. But there's the more popular part, which is known as the South Asian district. But we also know that it's not just only South Asian Muslims. There are Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, but you also have those who are Hindu that live there, and Catholics, and some of the other faiths represented. So that, in terms of when it goes deeper, you start to see that some of the needs that will be identified as Muslim is not necessarily separated from the other needs that is for the broader community. So definitely with the African American community, there's broader issues such as
Gerald, sorry, I'm interrupting you because we have to take a very quick break, but I know you're going to stay with us. We're going to take a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue the important conversation with our special guest, Gerald Hankerson, joining us live from the great city of Chicago in the United States. Don't be going anywhere. We'll be waiting. We'll be back after these short messages. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to I told you it was going to be a very short break with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV from our studios in Wakefield. Now, if you want to get in touch with us on social media, our handle is British Muslim TV. The lines are open. Any questions? We've got having an exclusive and fascinating conversation with Gerald Hankerson, because often we live in our own little communities, we live in our own little world, and we sometimes forget that we're part of a wider ummah. And part of my ambition on my program is to showcase to you the diversity and the strength of the Muslim Ummah around the world. And particularly tonight, we're concentrating on the United States and the city of Chicago. Gerald Hankerson is joining us from the city. Now, just before the break, we kind of started the conversation around the experience, the lived experience of African Americans being different to, say, Pakistanis or Indians. Would you accept that there's an anti-black racism within some elements of the Muslim community generally, but also what's it like in Chicago?
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for joining for this segment. I want to, be clear. Like, I believe that there's an understanding of what it means for accepting of any persons that are not necessarily identified as, white, Christian, and other things that we often would cite as the quote unquote normal profile here in the United States. When it comes to anti-blackness, there's elements of it that I think is present, whether that is intentional or not, whether it's unfounded or even just based on bad experiences previously, is present, but not to the point where I think it is so problematic, where there isn't flourishing partnerships, collaborations, relationships, friendships even. And so I think, 2020, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, as well as so many other murders and attacks on unarmed Black citizens, that definitely has spurred conversations. But to be honest, this has even happened even prior. I remember going back to Ferguson with the murder of Mike Brown in the suburbs of St. Louis and Ferguson. And there were questions about where we are as a Ummah when it comes to addressing social justice issues that are not with our names and people that practice Islam. So within the Muslim community, I think some of the conversations that had to be had, where there was either animosities or misunderstandings, really pointing to the respect of where Islam has been, since there was ever the name the United States of America. Remember, some of the first Africans that came, even before the British colonies, were Muslim, with the Spaniards and some of the other populations. But even the first enslaved Africans there had Muslims. And so that long history going into the 20th, when Islam was seen here not being recognized for, the deen that, most Sunnis, even Shias would probably identify, that created some schisms. And I think those are part of those hard conversations I mentioned earlier that are continuously being had. When you look at the infrastructure of our organizational and institutional networks, to really see who are the voices and experiences and insights that are welcomed and included in what is going to be charged to our promise here in the United States, but also the protection of our deen. So I think there have been strides made on both sides. But to say if this is a widespread problem, no, I don't think so. But I do believe that that's something that we can always speak much more on. And so not just only anti-Blackness, but any type of racism or prejudice on any side by anyone, because again, that's not tolerated within our deen.
Yeah, because the brutal murder of George Floyd back in May 2020 was a reckoning not just for the world, but particularly for American Muslims who didn't really understand anti-Black racism. It's a conversation I often have with members of Pakistani and Indian community. Do you think those people in sort of my community, if you like, Pakistani and Indian communities and other Asian communities, did that reflection? And what are people telling you in terms of what they learned from that period?
So some of the conversations I've had with personal relationships, it has centered on misunderstandings of what was, understood about the Black community, especially when you have the trope of the model minority. So that's the concept that for people that immigrated to the United States, that usually are either in some type of higher socioeconomic status, including education and professions, or just being pitted against other communities of color, underserved communities, under-resourced communities, and made to be where they're not making excuses and they're succeeding. And so I think that's some of the community members within the South Asian segment of Ummah have taken on to that. And so I've definitely had teachable moments, as you'll say, with people using the N-word, with people using even other words in Urdu or some of the other South Asian languages to refer to Blacks as Kolu or At, right? And so what that means for me, and not only just, South Asian communities, some other communities, when you're interacting with the larger Black community and thinking like, they're violent or they're ignorant or they're not trying hard enough, they're lazy. These are tropes that still continue to happen. So we see certain experiences where there isn't that grace, if you will, of understanding the history and the ongoing legacies from the likes of slavery, Jim Crow laws, the limitations of not being able to instill education, wealth, right? So this 400-year delay that is not necessarily afforded to people who recently had the choice, right, to come over versus those that were forced to come over. Those are contrasts where I know if given the opportunity for people to better learn and have a genuine understanding and appreciation of it, it can help eliminate those type of misunderstandings and misgivings. So, but again, I would definitely say the work is ongoing. It just takes to have those conversations, not be afraid to speak truths, but also have the room to, make sure that people are learning and they can actually apply what they learn, inshallah.
Inshallah. And now Chicago is seen as a city with a huge gun violence problem. How does that impact on American Muslims who live in the city like yourself?
So the first thing I usually say is a bullet knows no, name, right? So God forbid, any type of not just only, gun violence, but other types of violence. There's no necessary pause to kind of gauge like, what type of person are you before I commit this violation on your personhood. So again, I mentioned one example earlier, again, of many of the communities here in the city. They live pretty mixed in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds, in terms of where we see opportunities or lack thereof, and what that means in terms of whether the likes of the city, its other agencies and leadership and influential powers make choices to make sure that, all these different problems can be alleviated. So there's always the focus, obviously, on downtown Chicago, which is the main economic engine, whether it's tourism, obviously, the place of business, those type of things. But we also have now seen how violence is creeping into that section, as well as other sections that, people are very much alarmed. So when it comes to the Muslim communities, like, yes, I don't think we necessarily hear as many times that there are these unfortunate circumstances that occur, but we have had Muslims that unfortunately that have been robbed, killed, beaten, assaulted, but it's not necessarily solely because they're Muslim. It could be, sadly, that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But by Allah, I do understand to what my brother and colleague Ahmed was saying in the first segments. Muslims do take charge in terms of having more security at the masajid, being more mindful where to go and when, but also, again, not necessarily fall into those racial tropes that say that, certain communities, certain peoples, are all the only ones that perpetrators of crime. And so that's something I think that we have to work much more deeply on as well. We're not immune, again, unlike any other general community.
Yeah, and it's, as I said, it's a vibrant, powerful, strong community. What would you say to our international viewers watching this about, we've got about 3 minutes to just sell your city to our international viewers as a potential destination, tourist destination?
Chicago is always exaggerated from the days of Al Capone as being very violent. So that's something, unfortunately, that...
I survived, and I survived to tell the story, so yeah.
And I survived too, right?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. But, Chicago is always a place that's so welcoming. The violence, while is present in certain parts of the city, there's definitely a lot of people that come, and tourism has increased in spite of the pandemic. And so that has been growing yearly, but there's always something to do throughout the year. Very vibrancy of all the cultures and peoples around the world that made Chicago home, or at least made Chicago with the city that we celebrated for today. So I would not be scared to come visit. And heck, I might be your Chicago tour guide, historian, the whole nine. I'm very proud of the city, and I think it's something that people should not shy away from learning more about. The violence is anywhere. But I think in some ways it's kind of over-exaggerated by, pundits, and, that's something that we could withstand.
And President Obama is building his presidential library in the south side of Chicago. So that'll be something which will hopefully lift economic prosperity and regeneration.
A lot of projects besides that one, but that seems to be the biggest one. That's not too far from my home. In fact, I live not too far from Obama's home currently. So yeah, I have to brace myself for the traffic that's going to be forthcoming. But yeah, they already broke ground. And I've been seeing the plan since they first talked about it. So it's a very ambitious one, but they are definitely targeted to be that economic engine, but also a new cultural presence for the city.
Yeah, and the transformation, if you look at the plans online, are really amazing. Right, Gerald, we are halfway there. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. You're going to stay there with us, as when we come back after the break, we'll be talking to Gerald Hankerson about the outreach work that he does and how you break the barrier down between the Muslim community and wider society, because we often don't think about that. We often live in our silos, we live in our own communities and very busy in our lives. And how do we become outward looking? CARE in Chicago is doing some fantastic work of outreach, and I really want to share that with you, our viewers. Right, we'll take a very quick break. You know what's coming, some very short messages, and then me and my special guest, Gerald Hankerson, will be back live from the city of Chicago. Be with us shortly. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV, live from our studios here in Wakefield. Now we're going to take your calls on 01924231083 or get in touch with us on social media. The handle is British Muslim TV. Now we've got an exclusive conversation with our special guest, Gerald Hankerson, who's joining us live from the city of Chicago in the state of Illinois, which is in the United States. Now, Gerald, you're the coordinator for outreach for the Council of American Islamic Relations. How important is this outreach work to the American Muslim community?
Assalamu alaikum. Very important. It really helps sets in mind the relationships and the mindsets that every person, regardless of their faith, regardless of their political ideologies or any other affiliations they have, how they see Islam and the Muslim community here in the United States. So that there's different dynamics. Of course, there's the one within our own ummah to make sure that people understand why CARE Chicago exists, the Council of American Islamic Relations, as you noted. Discrimination, unfortunately, still occurs. And throughout the organization nationwide, we have seen particular disturbing trends. And so it is for our community members' rights and responsibilities to understand how the Constitution protects them and how not only just CARE Chicago, but how we can all come together to make sure that our community is stronger, more vibrant, and involved with what they say about how their lives are taking shape here in the city, the region, and the state. But when it comes to other entities and communities as such, that's a bit more intricate planning because we do have to keep in mind why we exist as an organization, that is to defend civil rights and fight against bigotry and promote appreciation and nurturance of who we are as citizens and residents in this country. So a lot of solidarity and coalition work across the lines, whether it's intercultural or interfaith engagement. Brother Ahmed referred to policy, as he noted, we're a 501c3, so we have to be nonpartisan, but we definitely want to get into the root of issues that concern us all. And a lot of ways for us to even just be more in sync with the institutions that lead us. So one of my roles, just for an example, is being the director of our internship and externship program. Also having formidable relationships with universities and colleges, but even high schools and even grades in junior high and middle school. So we can have opportunities for young people to understand professional development, but also how activism fits in their lives, regardless of where they decide to go in terms of professional career. So the outreach work is definitely key. And I would like to say, if, to Brother Ahmed's point, we have seen a growing arc in terms of Muslims being more visible and included in many different sectors of our society more than ever. But I do think it's still very much interesting to see that there are increased cases in some areas of civil rights law, where we look at policies that's coming from all levels of government, from Washington, D.C. to our state capital, even to our various mayors and village presidents. So there's still work to be done. But the good thing is that it's understood it just cannot be me by myself, right? It definitely takes the work of multiple people, both who are Muslim and of whatever other various backgrounds that believe in social justice and equity and progress.
Now, there is real fear that Muslims in Chicago are no longer feeling safe after there's an allegation that police officers beat a Palestinian teenager. What sort of work are you doing to kind of calm the situation down and get to the bottom of what actually happened?
So in this particular situation, this is not necessarily, unfortunately, new. I think one of the challenges that we have as an organization is encouraging community members to report any case where they feel that they have been discriminated against, where their constitutional rights have been violated. And this does oftentimes include law enforcement. So this particular case, it just so happens that there was a community member who's not Muslim that was just happened by recording this, right? And so that's what I mean by, it just can't be Muslims that are only involved. And so for this particular case, there has, which is ongoing. So there's updates all the time that's occurring on our local news, but namely just really speaking to what's right and what's wrong. So in this case, the young man involved was restrained by at least 2 police officers, and he was continuously being beaten, and he suffered injuries from it. So we're not saying that obviously that Muslims who potentially committed crimes, of course, they are subjected to the courts of law, be proven guilty in the courts of law if it gets that far. But what we're asking for, of course, is that people do not be physically violently beaten, let alone not necessarily any type of recourse towards those, in this case, like police officers that are trusted with serving and protecting, but definitely going overboard with their license to do so. So this is an ongoing case. It just happened literally last week. It's a lot of turning things. And so, but in much more broader efforts, we've always had efforts to connect with not only just law enforcement, but even to the likes of the FBI. There's a local bureau here. And then especially when it comes to the safety in the Muslim community. So there still has to be a working relationship. Mm-hmm. But when such situations as these occur, CARE Chicago would definitely respond. But the first thing that must be in order, people have to report. And if people do not bring such cases forward, any type of discrimination, then it goes unheard and it goes unresolved, and it continues to perpetuate these types of issues and circumstances.
What's the political representation like for Chicagoan Muslims in terms of the city and wider Illinois?
So, there was a newly released Illinois Muslim report where a few of our partner organizations and a local university, University of Illinois at Chicago, that just, again, also last week, shared the dynamics of the Muslim community throughout our state. And so it's a vibrant one. It is a community that is very much engaged, but also not necessarily all the time along the trends what we see for the general public. So the Muslim community, for instance, has a significant independent political base that they are really paying attention to the issues, not only that's happening overseas, but how is it impacting the day-to-day issues here. So Illinois is seen as a relatively strong blue base, aka, namely leaning towards the Democrats. But that does not mean that we don't have Muslims of all persuasions and particular different issues that sway them to vote one way or another. But what I am happy to see is that you do have Muslims that are being more engaged. Part of one of the things that, for example, with CARE, they've been definitely marking how many Muslims have been running for office. And in this more recent primaries that we just had for the elections that's going to be in November, we now have two Muslim candidates that will be on the ballot in November. We also had it in the previous cycle. So, and not just for the state legislature, we're talking about things that make our communities effective and run for the promise of our future. So school boards, library boards, you definitely have other civic agencies where Muslims are taking shape in terms of leadership and representation. So we're definitely more present and more politically minded, but we also know where we stand in terms of, regardless of the stripes, when it comes to policy, we should not be violated our First Amendment rights of practice of freedom of religion and association, the association thereof. So yeah, this is a vibrant, civically engaged Muslim segment here in the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and positive role models are so important for young Muslims, but I suppose for young people who, apart from yourself, is playing that role in Chicago and in the Muslim organizations.
That, I think, more than ever, even compared to when I was in that direct age group. But thank you for still calling me young. I appreciate it. It's more promise, and it's more attainable. I think about 20 or so odd years ago, it would be rare to hear Muslims who want to go into law or politics, let alone feels like journalism or acting or anything that's beyond engineering and computers and medicine. And of course, those fields are still necessary because we have been making so much strides for not only Muslim community, but all Americans. But I do think the generations that are coming up now have really seen a lot of epic events that make them really question, how true the Constitution is in protecting someone that looks like me. And the discovery doesn't take much to see that there's no one that are in those seats that have leadership roles and can exact change that reflect the merits and values that they hold dear. So not only just in terms of faith, but in terms of other particular ways of understanding and knowing. And so when you have efforts to make sure that young Muslims understand that there is a pathway to lead if you're even just running for a school board, that's important because what that encompasses is what that means for a Muslim student to understand that they can freely celebrate the 2 days of Eid and not be suspended or penalized for classwork because they took the day off, or even more something deeper, like being able to have prayer if that's possible, or some alternative for that to happen. Well, having a Muslim school board member, that could be life-changing in that it just creates the conversation and understanding as to why not only is it important, but how is it engaging with other community members. So yeah, I think they have more access and understanding than ever. And you can see that in real time, not only here in Chicago, but across the country.
Yeah. And I suppose it's something which you can see across the world as well. We're going to come to our final break. Time absolutely flies when I'm talking to my guests, particularly so tonight, dear Gerald. I know you're going to stay there, but yeah, that's really important message as we come to the final break, is really making sure that we have good, positive role models for our children and young people as they grow up. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean people within the Muslim community. You can look at the work that footballers and other people in various industries have done. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the important conversation with our dear friend Gerald Hankerson, who's joining us live from the city of Chicago in the United States. See you shortly. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. As I said, I don't know where the time goes. Time is absolutely flying. We're talking to Gerald Hankerson, community activist, still with us live on British Muslim TV. I just feel the need to share this with our viewers. We were talking about the fact that I've got a shiny head, and we did try to get me to wear makeup once. And what happened was that I finished the programme, went out to meet some friends, and as I was meeting my friends, people looking at me crazily, strangely, why is a man in a suit wearing makeup? And it was only later on that I realised that I still had makeup. But anyway, that's I just thought I'd share that with you. Anyway, we're talking. I don't know why I shared that, but anyway, we're talking to our dear friend Gerald Hankerson from Chicago in the United States. So tell us, we were talking just earlier on about role models and how important they are. What work are you doing to bring communities together to defeat racism and Islamophobia?
Assalamu alaikum. So my work has been pretty consistent. For me, it's definitely based in me being a people's person. I have always thrived in being in spaces where people can be seen and heard, where people are not overlooked or forgotten, and definitely not disrespected or dehumanized. So I think it definitely had to start where my values are, and particularly, alhamdulillah, like my own life experiences, and I've had, alhamdulillah, some very high highs and some very low lows. And so taking that all into account, the work and the way that I've been given sort of the allowance to kind of guide the outreach work that I lead at CARE Chicago has always been kind of centered on like how can I make sure, that this circle over here and these few individuals here, somehow we can all become into this one particular space. And obviously, it would be naive to think like this would be sustainable or in, some way, somehow always tethered, but that's not the case. And so there is, challenges in really, trying to convince people, to commit to the appeal that you're striving to make to them to be a part of something, whether that is, doing volunteering or ensuring that, there's a way to be involved in these conversations, but be more, effective if they're a part of it to participate. And then when you think about, of course, we are the only CARE office in the state of Illinois. And so even though we're named CARE Chicago, by default, I have to be concerned of all the Muslim communities throughout our state, but also our greater Chicago land. So that includes the neighboring communities in Indiana and Wisconsin. So there are definitely some efforts to make sure that those communities are also not forgotten. And so usually the base of it is connected with the masajid at minimum, but that's our foundations. But it goes for so much more further than that. So there's various coalitions and networks that we're members of, both Muslim and other different sectors. Most closely to my heart is, again, the youth and young adults. When we're talking about like where we are, the one basis I always leave with people is this. We now have crossed, over 20 years since 9/11. And now our clients are becoming, individuals who were not yet born or too young to understand what happened on that tragic day. They have inherited that unfortunate legacy. And sometimes their perpetuators are their peers who also were too young or were not yet born, right? So that in and of itself is an ongoing drive and mantra for me to be committed to the work. And not only just for young people, but anyone. And I think there's still some ways to go, but alhamdulillah, I'm very happy to be a part of the successes and victories that we've been able to achieve.
Yeah, that's really important. We're coming towards the end of the program. I suppose my final, question is, what can we look forward to in terms of the work that you will do in your city?
So for me, I think one of the things that's really exciting that I've been participating in is this wonderful research collaborative with a local university that's looking at how Muslim organizations can better collaborate and engage with one another. One of the things that I think that has been an undercurrent to a lot of the questions that you asked is about 20 years ago and further back, Muslim communities were broken into silos. And we really never really were encouraged to really come together to be more direct in how we serve our ummah until post 9/11. And those are a lot of forces that way. And even still, about 20 years later, there's strains, of course, that impacts nonprofits and other institutional leaders. So we're trying to break this once and for all. So there was about 20 plus groups of us, including here in Chicago, involved with that. And we get to see how we can drive that forward. So that's one of the things that I'm really inspired by. And so
I'm so sad we've lost. We've finished. We've got no more time left. Thank you so much. Absolutely loved it, and look forward to connecting with you soon again, sir.
Look forward to it. Assalamu alaikum.
God bless you. Love to the family. Community activist Gerald Hankerson joining us live there from the city of Chicago in the United States. Fascinating discussion. And as I said, part of the ambition when when I joined British Muslim TV was to do these type of programs. And I hope you found it useful. And so the next time you're in Chicago, check him out. Gerald Hankerson there joining us. Right. Thank you so much to Edward, Ahmed Mitchell and Gerald Hankerson. Next week, we're back at the usual time of 8:30 on a Wednesday. I hope you have a great weekend when it comes. From me, Mohammed Shafiq, and the whole team here at British Muslim TV, thank you so much for joining us. Take care of yourself and each other. I'll see you very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.